Hello everyone and welcome back. It's Akizil here, and I'll be continuing my reaction to I Can't Believe It's Not Magic Technocratic Union Mage Lore by TheBurgerkrieg. Sorry for the delay on this. Is my time got kind of absorbed by barrow trauma the last few days. But without further ado, let's get into this and see what else there is about the technocracy.
The past. Things are commonplace in parts of the technocracy that in other parts of the same technocracy would be considered blatant reality deviance. For instance, in America, you will get Hollywood physics at the outer stretches of the consensus membrane where people they get shot. They keep on walking because they're just such tough guys. Dodging bullets, that's a thing they do. In East Asia, technocrats arrange their offices in accordance to the rules of feng shui and commune with their ancestors at the temple. And as a matter of fact, for the Union's self-proclaimed rational atheism, a lot of technocrats are very religious. Parts of the organization have deeply religious roots. Not to mention there is
Makes sense considering, Inquisition.
an almost spiritual reverence for the laws that are known as the Precepts of Damien, which are kind of like the Ten Commandments for anti-wizards. But no, the flowery language is just because the technocracy is kind of an old organization. There's no such thing as them feeling there's something mystical about those words, because there is no such thing as something mystical. But instead of getting into
It's still kind of funny. It's like, yeah, there's no such thing as anything mystical. There's no magic. It's like, meanwhile, them trying to get rid of magic by making the consensus to say that magic isn't possible. Also, the whole thing with apparently Eastern technocrats will still take part in some of those old traditions says to me either the technocracy hasn't been as successful as they'd like in wiping out cultural beliefs and traditions that don't conform to the worldview they want, or that they are very much fragmented, similar to the Christian church and all of its different denominations.
all that, we should talk about how the technocracy is actually structured and how it works. Though often portrayed as the grand puppet masters that pull the strings of everything that happens, and there is some degree of truth to that, the technocracy does not actually control the world. For the most part, the strings that they do have often don't really work all that well. They nudge the world around and hope for the best. And not all of the many arms of the Technocratic Union know what the others are doing, much less are pushing or pulling in or from the same direction. The technocracy may appear like an all-powerful entity with infinite resources to an individual within it, but they operate globally. And by that, I don't just mean everywhere in the world, but everywhere off the world also. The moon, the Mars, the fucking underworld where ghosts live, parallel dimensions where unfathomable spirits sort of hang out, the Hollow Earth, or Hollow Earths plural, they're trying to get into that. The technocracy is everywhere, expensive, and in a lot of places it has to be there quietly, even more expensive. They have a Dyson sphere to maintain around Alpha Centauri. Although,
Yes, more of that magic, well, not magic, but more of that technological stuff like the teleporter that normal people just go, wait a minute. Because if I remember correctly, isn't that Dyson sphere, the whole idea of it is essentially it's like you're building a giant solar farm that just encompasses an entire star so that you can harvest the entire energy output of a star.
to be fair, rumor has it that they didn't actually build it, they just found it, which does reduce the upfront costs a little. Speaking of which, this video...
Wait, but if they just found a Dyson sphere around a star in Alpha Centauri, then who built it? Are there also going to be aliens in addition to all the paranormal stuff that goes on in World of Darkness?
is sponsored, as always, by my Patreon patrons. This video format, the long form thing, which I actually really enjoy doing, it has brought me a lot of success. It's proven itself to be extremely popular among all of you, but it is an order of magnitude more work than how I used to do it, which means a lot fewer videos that I'm putting out, ultimately more content in terms of like minutes and hours that I put out, but it is less videos, and I cannot cover as much ground. So I really deeply appreciate the support of all my patrons, and I invite you to, if you can do it, if you have the bucks to spare, maybe chuck me a few to keep these lights on up there, because that'll help me pay the electricity bill. But really only if you, like, can afford it. Don't feel pressured into if you don't have the money, don't do it. The Technocratic Union is a fusion of 5 different large organizations known as the Conventions. These are Iteration X, the New World Order, the Progenitors, the Syndicate, and the Void Engineers. Every one of these conventions has its own culture and its own goals and ideas of how the technocracy should be run, and we're going to be talking.
So, when Big D in Hunt of the Pyrenees said that Nikola Tesla was a fascist in line with the New World Order, I wonder if he was specifically talking about that sect of the technocracy.
About each of them more in detail later. Right now, all you need to know is that each of these conventions is a titanic organization in its own right, and they all work together, ideally playing into each other's strengths, in order to get the job done. You can visualize the organizational structure of the technocracy as like a 5-sided pyramid, and the bottom half of that pyramid is located on the front lines. For most people, that refers to Earth. Some would also say it's places that are just beyond Earth, like the underworld. Really, any place that is, like, not safe and where the technocracy operates. And then others would refer to that as being behind enemy lines. So really, if you want to be certain that you're trying to get the terminology right, front lines means Earth. Each region of the world is controlled by a so-called symposium, which has the local leadership of all of the 5 conventions coordinating, making decisions, implementing the large-scale technocratic ideas. Symposiums can vary in size. They might cover anything from like a major city to a large but sparsely populated geographical area. So London and New York have symposia, but so do Central Australia and the Amazon. They get orders from up high and then implement them on a local level. And also they report everything that happens on a local level up to back on high. Depending on the degree of influence that the individual conventions have in any given region and the needs of that region, the local culture within a symposium can vary also. Often, several symposiums actually coordinate with each other to implement over-regional terranorming and make sure that there's not too much of a disconnect at the borders. Because, of course, every symposium has its own individual needs because it needs to prioritize its own projects. So the reality it constructs will be subtly different, but you don't want to, like, rip the sheet when you go to the next symposium's area of influence. The individual conventions, and often also several different conventions working together, create so-called constructs, which in Mage terms are equivalent to chantries. They are safe places, office buildings, laboratories, factory halls, bases, whatever kind of stuff that they need, where the local consensus is trimmed entirely to the needs of the mages that live there. I'm sorry, enlightened scientists that live there. Similar to how some castle in rural Scotland, where the stairwells move on their own, might be conducive to the needs of hermetic tradition mages. Or how a rooftop commune might suit the needs of the Sahajiya by there being a lot of drugs. Like, seriously, a lot of drugs. Just a ton of drugs. And also beanbag chairs. In these places, sometimes hidden in or out of plain sight, but...
You know, I kind of wonder what kind of psychedelic cocktails those sometimes, like, the Sahajiya might come up with.
always ultimately hidden, technocrats find shelter, equipment, and stage their operations. Agents within the technocracy tend to be part of an amalgam, an organizational unit comparable to a cabal of mages. Like a cabal, an amalgam is a group of agents, sometimes from the same convention, sometimes from various different conventions, that work together on a project. Unlike a cabal, which is usually a voluntary association, then amalgam, much like most of the things within the technocracy, is very much not voluntary. To its agents, the technocracy is both more and less totalitarian than you think. You're not part of an amalgam because you trust these people and they're your friends, you get along with them very well. Although, for the sake of operational efficiency, management expects you to. Amalgams happen because supervisors are handed down a task and then assemble a team to do the task. They look into what agents are suited for it, requisition agents and assets from other conventions as is necessary, whatever they need to do in order to get the job done. Then they put them together, brief them, equip them, and send them out into the field. Amalgams don't necessarily need to stick together for more than a single mission, but supervisors do often find that actually fostering bonds of trust and friendship is good for operational efficiency. This is why, even when an amalgam is not on like a continuous mission anyway, they do tend to be grouped together again on subsequent assignments. So then
That's kind of like, if I remember correctly, during World War II, the British Army had a system where squad members would rotate, and they'd have I don't remember the exact numbers, but there were about as many who were off duty in the squad as were actually on duty, to ensure that if the squad took losses, they'd have enough people in reserve who were familiar with each other to potentially just refill the entire squad. And that was part of why they had them like rotating in and out, to make sure that all these people were familiar with each other and knew how to work together. Like, not just work together as, soldiers, but as just people in general.
Then they do the job, report to the supervisor reports to the symposium reports to management. Yeah, as you can probably tell, being part of the technocracy involves a lot of paperwork, which is far from the only sacrifice you'll have to make. A quintessential dichotomy within...
It's beginning to sound like the technocracy might give the ministerium, I think it was in... Actually, no. Which one was the? Yeah, I think it was the minister. I'm getting confused here. The bureaucracy in 40K for the Imperium are run for their money.
The technocracy is the divide of old life and new life. In the past, when you were inducted into the technocracy as a newly awakened individual, often with the technocracy actually helping along in your awakening process, what would invariably happen is that you would officially die and disappear completely from your life, your old life, and be entirely banned from interacting with any of that. You would start your new life. You'd be trained in the techniques, instructed on the rules of the technocracy, usually on some sort of space station. Your new life will be entirely within the technocracy. So on one hand, you will never have to worry about builds ever again. On the other hand, literally every single aspect of your entire existence is now controlled by the technocracy. From where and how you live, what food you can eat, whom you can socialize with, of course, obviously, where you work, which assets you own, whether or not you're allowed to reproduce. Nothing is sacred. You are no longer a person. The technocracy is especially controlling of people's personal relationships because they do recognize the need for love and community that everyone has and claim to provide it without prejudice. But they also use it as an incentive and a means of censure. It's not just that you have to reach a certain rank before you're allowed to marry another agent. And then you need extra paperwork to have kids before or after that. I mean, you're not allowed to have them before that, really, unless you literally do not believe in marriage. Even if you want to have just a sexual relationship, you need to ask your supervisor if you're allowed to do that.
When he says do not believe in marriage, My first assumption is that he means, the people who culturally come from, who either culture or just generally in a worldview, who don't really believe in the idea of marriage being necessary for people to form a union. But I also, just because the whole thing of the consensus, imagine an agent of the technocracy who's just like, marriage? That's a myth. That's not a thing. Believe that marriage doesn't exist in that sense.
Anything that might in any way compromise what an agent is capable of doing for the Union is something that the Union has a right to control. This is also why you're pretty much never going to be allowed to date anyone from the outside either. Now, if you turn out to be a competent and trustworthy agent, you will be awarded certain freedoms. You can have a very nice, very comfortable new life, far beyond anything you might have ever dreamed of in your old life. But fuck up and stop towing the line, and they will take all that shit away in a heartbeat. Now, in recent times, as part of the transformation...
That sounds a lot like how cults, and many religious organizations actually do things. Because quite a few of them actually, the draw that keeps people showing up isn't the actual doctrine and scripture and all that stuff. It is the sense of community that these places provide.
Of the technocracy into a new age of the world. Many of the old life, new life dichotomies, the hard lines, have been not necessarily disappearing, but certainly getting softer. Because it turns out a lot of people don't want to leave their old lives, or when they have, in their new lives, are too drawn back to them to really operate as efficiently as the technocracy would like. There's been a change of sentiment where a lot of management has been finding that this actually costs the technocracy a lot of very capable recruits and penalizes agents that are otherwise very, very good at their job. So yet again, for the change of holy, sacred, sanctimonious efficiency, the technocracy has been changing. In North Africa, there is currently a pilot program where many newly recruited operatives are specifically kept embedded in the communities that they are from. And then those community ties are utilized for the purposes of the technocracy. This has not only proven itself to be rather successful in terms of reducing the psychological stresses that agents have to deal with, it's also proven to be a boon to shaping local consensus because people are generally more trusting of what people that they know say as opposed to, strangers, outsiders to their community. And it's also made it much easier to identify individuals who are on the verge of enlightenment, which of course
I imagine it also makes it a lot easier to do things in general when people aren't on edge because, people just get disappeared. Because, join the technocracy and then you are no longer allowed to associate with anyone from your whole life, and essentially you have to start over. It's just and to everyone else, it's just like, where'd this guy go? What happened to him? Nobody knows until he just starts showing up again somewhere, maybe potentially somewhere distant, and they're like, it's gonna cause a lot of questions to be asked, I imagine.
In the past was a major advantage that usually the traditions held. Now, a certain degree of fluidity between old life and new life has always been present in the Technocratic Union. And you might think that this is specifically a hardline for agents who are awakened individuals, but this is not so. Basically, the technocracy employs three different kinds of people. The bulk of the organization actually comprises sleepers. Regular people who do not know jack shit about magic, but are working at some sort of institution that is operated by the technocracy. Sometimes they might even work at a construct, but they will never witness any of the really crazy, wild, hypertech magic shit. The manager of your local bank, the secretary at Cape Canaveral, the janitor at Weird Shit University,
They just say Weird Shit University.
Very few of them know about the technocracy at all, and those few who do are all bound to saying absolutely nothing about it through the magical chaos of the NDA. But They draw salaries from the Union, and the Union has them on their lists as assets who are sleepers. Then come the extraordinary citizens, which is a sort of catch-all term for individuals inducted into the secrets of the technocracy, or at least some of them. They are the strong shoulders of the organization, the beasts of burden that get the bulk of the hard work done. Often the distinguishing characteristic of an extraordinary citizen is that they have the ability to apply some sort of hypertech, or any other type of magic, and you might not have heard it because it says this in my script, but obviously you can't see the letters I'm speaking, but I said magic with a C instead of the CK, which usually defines magic in Mage. World of Darkness has two types of magic. There is dynamic magic, which we've already talked about. It's the thing that proper awakened mages do. And there's static or linear magic, which is magic that anyone can do if they know how it works. Theoretically, static magic often violates consensus. But consensus is complicated, and static magic does not exist in defiance of it like dynamic magic does, but as a sort of strand that is woven into the complex tapestry that is consensus. So if you know about and understand the enormously complex body of knowledge and skill set that is required for alchemy, fortune-telling, and spirit communion, or in the case of the technocracy, extraordinary citizens, plasma weapons, cybernetics, and faster-than-light engines, you can manifest those effects even when you are not awakened. Tremere blood magic, for instance, is a form of static magic, and some people might argue that all of the vampiric disciplines are static magic, but that's kind of a dubious statement. Unlike dynamic magic, the effects you can achieve with static magic are very clearly defined and not flexible in any way at all. The skills do not translate to related fields. They have very particular rules, and you need to follow those rules precisely in order to achieve the effects that you want.
I kind of wonder then. So then is static magic tied to that thing he mentioned in the previous part that I reacted to? So this is where he mentioned that there is an objective reality which things like vampires, for example, are a part of. Also, since he mentioned that Tremere blood magic is static magic, I also I wonder if the reason they call that is because, vampires can't use dynamic magic because, becoming a vampire severs you from your avatar and all that.
It's like learning to play a particular song on the piano, as opposed to playing, just the piano as an instrument. Being able to create new songs or improvising on the fly. And much like songs are created by people who know how to play the instrument or how to make the music, any discipline of static magic will have been created by practitioners of dynamic magic that have practiced that dynamic magic in the same way enough times, and enough people have witnessed it for it to become accepted as consensus. The traditions call these types of people hedge mages or sorcerers, and they kinda look down on them, which the technocracy usually prides itself on not doing. And they don't as much, but they kinda still do. Which is stupid on both sides, really, because sorcerers can be immensely powerful. And the great advantage of extraordinary citizens, of course, is that you can always just make more of them by teaching more people the right things. And in a way, you can do static magic too. You can operate a computer, a microwave, drive a car, do all kinds of stuff that once upon a time was only possible to practitioners of enlightened hypertech. That doesn't necessarily make you an extraordinary citizen though, because this isn't exactly how that is defined. You'd also be an extraordinary citizen if you had some sort of psychic powers, like a telekinesis, the mind controlled, anything you've seen Professor X do in X-Men. Because apparently the psychics that just have inborn psychic abilities are just also a thing in World of Darkness. I found this out very recently. If in a purely theoretical scenario that definitely has never happened in any way, shape, or form, you were to be a vampire who works for the technocracy and knows about the technocracy, you would be considered an extraordinary citizen. Even if you didn't understand any kind of weird high-tech, hypertech type of stuff. But you still know about the technocracy, you still work for the technocracy, like say you're like some sort of super hardcore commando soldier who uses guns and explosives to kill aliens on the front lines. You'd still be
so there are aliens.
an extraordinary citizen, and there's actually plenty of these types of extraordinary citizens. And of course, finally, the third type of person that the technocracy employs are mages, people who do enlightened science. And the place where the hard old life, new life line is drawn can be different for all of these categories of people depending on where in the technocracy they work. For instance, within the Syndicate, even the awakened, enlightened scientists usually remain the old people that they used to be and retain the old contacts they used to have, because that's very useful to the kind of work that that convention does. The Void Engineers are gonna take you to outer space. So, even if you're like a sleeper who works in a facility that facilitates that kind of thing, you might disappear from your old life entirely. The upper portion of the pyramid, where
Yeah, makes sense if you're gonna be going into space and potentially fighting aliens. Which, no, I'm curious about this whole, like, alien business that is going on.
everything converges is known as management. If you're an agent, you write reports for your supervisor, who writes reports for the symposium, which writes reports for the labyrinthine architecture of hierarchy that is management. And the thing about management is that it's almost entirely not located on the front lines, meaning they hang out in space. We've talked before about constructs. There's also something called horizon constructs, which is similar to a horizon realm for mages. So even though kinda every technocratic base where consent
I have no idea what a horizon realm is. But since you mentioned that Chen did some being, well, since it was similar to a construct, I have a guess.
consensus is suspended for the sake of enlightened scientists is a construct. When technocrats refer to constructs, they actually usually mean horizon constructs, which are the space stations. They're usually out in the umbra, in a sort of Earth's orbit type umbra, in the like very borderline fine reality region, able to maintain communication but still hidden through hypertech. And they don't just house the upper floors of the technocracy. Horizon constructs are also the places where most agents live, train, socialize. That doesn't mean you take a rocket ship to work every day. There's like quantum tunneling passageways within constructs.
Yeah, just step into the teleporter. So you can get into space in 3 seconds flat.
That will take you there much less of a hassle. Every Horizon construct is different in terms of its culture, its layout, obviously, the way it's designed, and it highly depends on who's in charge of that construct and what kind of operations are being performed there. And so no matter how nice a Horizon construct might look, make no mistake, the technocracy is always totalitarian. It's just sometimes wearing a friendly face. Never forget this. It's everything terrible about corporate culture and military culture mixed together and distilled. Technocratic agents are treated like machines. Supervisors often have to fight senior managers in order to get like R&R, leisure and recovery time for their agents. And depending on the convention, making the argument that they need rest and recovery maintenance like machines is actually going to be a very good line of reasoning. To the Technocratic Union, you are an asset, an investment, and they need to get the most out of you to fulfill their sacred mission. As an enlightened agent, you are not a person, you are just an incredibly valuable asset. Even in the most liberal of Horizon constructs, where you get to spend 3 days a week frolicking in the park with exotic, dreamt-up animals, your every action, your every word, maybe even your every thought is being monitored. And if management is of the opinion that there is something a little bit amiss, you might find in your day planner a little appointment to a place called Room 101 for a spot of the all social processing. But if we're entirely honest, most of the really upper management, like the great old men, the truly enlightened masters, they exist way further out than just Earth's orbit. And so a super important factor as to whether and how management actually influences your particular chronicle is whether or not and how the dimensional anomaly happened in your chronicle. If it didn't happen, maybe the same entities are still in charge. Or maybe they aren't, but for different reasons. As much as the technocracy would like you to believe that there is a singular tip to the pyramid, there really isn't, actually. That's not a thing. No one, perhaps not even leadership itself, can tell you what exactly leadership looks like. There is...
So, the pyramid basically has a tessellated dodecahedron on top.
one particular manifestation. There's a lot of rumors, theories, and babbling about it, especially among the lower ranks, that does tend to have supreme overriding authority over everything. I am talking about control, with a capital C. Control usually manifests as a human of some race or some gender, it really depends on the encounter, wearing a white suit, and then they just sort of give orders. If you're not top tier management, you will pretty much never encounter control. To the extent that even most middle managers don't, really believe that control exists. But there are instances of control appearing to even the lowliest of field agents. Or even the secretaries of enlightened agents who think they're working for some sort of law firm. They've never heard the word technocracy in their life. And nobody knows why control does this. Though control's authority is compelling and absolute, it does tend to be a bit more gentle than certain other, elements of management in the way it gives orders, a little more respectful. Now, depending on how you run the dimensional anomaly aspect of your chronicle, control might be around or it might not be around. If the dimensional anomaly happened, probably not, but maybe if you feel like it's a necessary element for your chronicle, put it in there. The main thing, though, is if the dimensional anomaly happened in general, most of especially senior upper management will have been cut off from the rest of the pyramid, disappeared in the wherever. The more severe the dimensional anomaly was, the more horizon constructs were lost in the process. If it's still ongoing, there might actually not be any viable horizon constructs in your chronicle at all. In the standard middle-of-the-road scenario, most of the upper middle management type people are present on the near-Earth horizon construct space stations. Some of them surviving, others rebuilt, a very few built anew. And so, in this scenario, a major problem continues to present itself. The people in charge of the Technocratic Union are utterly out of touch. And by that I mean both with reality and the lower steps of the pyramid. There is perhaps an irreconcilable schism between the ideals of management and the realities of working in the field. According to management, there is no ambiguity in the world. Everything is either consensus appropriate or reality deviance. There is only adherence to protocol or failure. Bending the rules to get the job done is not possible. This is not a scenario that ever occurs. Management is in the business of making reality, and if reality does not perfectly align with the thing that they have in mind, it's because of the incompetence of the field agents. This is one of those inherent contradictions within the technocracy. Mages are defined by their ability to bend reality to their preferences, and bending reality to a certain preference is exactly what the technocracy is doing by shaping consensus. Technocratic leadership is composed of visionaries in this regard, and not only do their visions of reality not align with each other, they certainly do not align with consensus. For many mages, actually, there comes a point where they reach a level of self-actualization where they cannot live on Earth anymore. They need to make their own horizon realms with their own rules that accord to their worldview, because if they stepped on Earth, paradox would pretty much immediately rip them apart. The enlightened masters of the technocracy have the option to exist in worlds where all of the work that they envision the organization doing is already done. In fact, they have to exist in those places. So why would they not go there? Especially if they are aware that their presence at the front lines might cause disturbances in reality that would not be particularly beneficial to the mission of the technocracy. The problem is that the places they do hang out adhere entirely to the rules of reality that they envision. To have the kind of power they have, they must believe in those things very strongly, and they are never confronted with any contrary facts. Things function very neatly in the theories they have on how things should work. They require sometimes only a tiny adjustment in how you view the world.
So it sounds like the leadership quite literally living their own chosen reality, and basically you cannot tell them anything that would conflict with their view of reality.
But only in that sterile context, because on the front lines, these things often represent fundamental shifts in reality itself. The theory may say that something is there, but it just isn't. And to management, this usually means that the field agents failed to look hard enough for it. This promotes a sort of gradient of out-of-touchness and deception the farther up you go the pyramid of management. And
that honestly also sounds kind of like a bad parent, actually, as well. Well, where it's like give someone very vague instructions on where to find something, and then when they can't find it, the response is, you just didn't look hard enough.
Honest supervisor that informs management about why their plans cannot work is not going to get very far. If you want to make it in the technocracy, you need to indulge management. In a sense, ineffective operations and making shit up in the interest of placating the visions of reality that management has is a much quicker path to promotion than actually trying to suss out why the idea that they had did not work. This creates a set of systemic conditions that inherently favors self-interested leaders that want to grow only their own power to the detriment of everyone else, and have very little in the way of moral convictions when it comes especially to social manipulation. Petty authoritarian
Actually, this actually sounds a lot like how a lot of authoritarian governments are run, where everyone's afraid of giving their higher-ups bad news, so they just tell them what they want to hear. And then you end up with decisions being made on objectively incorrect information that results in disaster.
who delight in having power over others, punishing people for sport, keeping them in line with fear. There's another type of leader, one you will find only rarely in the technocracy. These are empathetic paragons who inspire actual loyalty in their subordinates, who treat them with respect and compassion because they understand that they are as accountable to their subordinates as they are to the people that give them orders. In an organization like the technocracy, which is ruled by the first type of leader, the second type of leader is almost never going to get promoted. It threatens the leadership of the petty authoritarians by being, uncontroversially, more effective. It is just an objectively better leadership style that inspires actual loyalty, real respect, not just respect based on rank, but respect based on the person. These are the types of leaders that you would go the extra mile for because you know they would do the same for you. And if you're a fucking asshole, sociopath, piece of shit, you're not gonna promote people like that because if they climb in rank, if they accrue more power, they might become a threat to you one day. Wow, what a fucking really fictional thing that is completely made up and not in any way an extremely accurate representation of much of the culture of today and also for many decades and centuries. This is a fictional thing that isn't real. This is just one of the perennial big organization problems that plague the technocracy. Here's another one. If someone is always promoted when they do well, the place that they ultimately will get stuck at is going to be the place in which they were the least good. Because once they're no longer extremely good at their job, they stop getting promoted. Everyone is promoted just beyond their degree of competency. On the other hand, many incompetent people often get promoted up and away because, if they're not doing the actual work, maybe they will be less damaging to the organization. This then leads to some people doing deliberately shoddy work because they think this will get them a better paid and privileged position. The technocracy has the fewest issues with this last problem, but even in spite of their very complex review standards and a system that actually kind of works in that regard, it still comes up. But okay, enough about the fucking bureaucracy and the paperwork. Let's talk about the cool shit, the magic that isn't magic. Or as some agents unmutually call it...
Actually, hey, I'll stop here for now and continue the reaction part 3. This has been fun to watch, and I hope you guys enjoyed watching with me. Again, should definitely subscribe to TheBurgerkrieg and like his video. He puts a lot of work into these, and they're fun to watch and very informative. But until next time, ta-ta!